September 12th, 1999, Waking Up Class 1. Well, as Robert would say, let's get started. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you all here. Welcome. I welcome you with all my heart. All is well. Everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Robert started every talk that way, and hopefully by the end of this series of talks you will know what that means, rather than have it be some off the top of your head statement that we always used to think, yeah, easy for you to say. But I'd like us all to have a vision of what that means. Robert Adams was my guru. He spent 6 years working on me, cooking me, as he said, and he's made me everything I'm not, and for that I'm very much indebted to him, of course. And before that was Bhagwan Rashneesh, who cracked the nut open. And before that and after that and all along in between was Goldsmith and 4 or 5 of his students who have become teachers. And so there's a history now of more than 20 years of my being led from high teacher to high teacher and enlightened master to enlightened master. And it's been such a gift, and it's time to share that now. In this house now, we've been meeting here for 5 years, and we've done a class on the principles of the infinite way, and we've done a script class, script 1, for close to a year, and with kid work. And we've done a short series of talks on mysticism and metaphysics, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that material again. The class wasn't ready to hear it that time, so we'll try that again. And we've done another script class, and we've done more kid work, and we've had script classes being done outside of here, but associated with this and kid work. And we've done relationship groups, and going to continue with that. And we've done meditations, and we've been very busy for 5 years, and we've developed quite a community. I'm delighted that I know everybody here, so I feel like I can say anything I want to, It's just wonderful, Barbara's crowd isn't here listening to me, This is just us, and this is just really wonderful. So many of us have been working on ourselves for 5 years, and working on our kids, working on our humanhood, working on our scripts, working on trying to get enlightenment, trying to get all sorts of things. And unfortunately, there's nothing to get, but we'll get to that later. The danger of all of this is all necessary work in one sense, but the danger of all of this work is that we get into a real habit of trying to improve our humanhood, to try to arrive at that point where our life is without struggle, comfortable, happy. American culture seems to have the image that the purpose of life is to get retired with enough money that you can live very comfortably, get the house with the white picket fence around it, go in there and live comfortably with no pain and with some reasonable level of happiness. And that seems to be the goal in life. And most people begin the spiritual work in order to arrive at an increased level of comfort in their humanhood, in their material life. And I'm here to tell you that's impossible. As long as you have a human life, you will be uncomfortable. A lot of you have learned a lot of spiritual principles, and your lives have improved extraordinarily. And if you compare your life now with your life 1 year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, you will discover all sorts of stuff is not there anymore that used to bother you. And yet, for all of us who are human, the list of things we lack is just as long as it was. The list of things we desire is just as long as it was. The list of problems we have is just as long as it was. Everything good has introduced the possibility of losing it, and that's bad. For every good, there is a corresponding bad. And they're not like good and bad. They're like good and bad, flip sides of the same coin. So what this class is about forgetting working on improving our humanhood, forgetting trying to work on increasing our comfort level, which those of you who work intimately with me know is sheer nonsense. The longer you've been with me, the more uncomfortable you've gotten. So if the purpose of life is not to get comfortable and retire and live happily ever after, what is the purpose of life? Well, life as we know it has no purpose because it doesn't exist. What this game is about, this Leelaa is about. Leelaa is a lovely word. It's a Sanskrit word which means the play of the gods. What this Leelaa is about God playing. God playing God's game. Not my game, not your game, not anybody's game. It's not about us getting comfortable and living happily ever after. It's about God doing exactly what God is doing, whatever that is, for God's own purposes. All there is consciousness. All there is God. The most phenomenal thing that ever happened, except that it didn't happen, it's eternal, is that there was consciousness, that there is awareness, that there is consciousness. That's the most amazing thing that ever happened, and the only thing that's ever happened. There is this consciousness, which is what we're talking about when we call God. When we say spiritual, we can substitute the word consciousness or awareness. All there is this awareness. We've added all sorts of things to it. We've personified it, and we've given it all sorts of anthropomorphic attributes, and have given it powers to grant and withhold, and all these types of beliefs that have developed as humanity has developed in its spirituality. Pagan beliefs. The Christian church is one of the most pagan churches that's ever existed. Praying, supplicating to God to stop withholding things. Is that any different from praying for rain or praying for the locust to go away? Supplicating for this and stop withholding that and start giving this and start withholding that. Organized religion is very pagan. The amazing thing is that there is awareness. And this awareness is expressing itself in its own way. And the way it expresses itself is as what we would call the universe, as us. Everything is an expression of God. Joel's tapes about the tree of life and the branches is all about the tree being God, the branches being us. All of everything is this God consciousness expressing itself, and its consciousness, it's thinking about itself, it's thinking thoughts. In the beginning was the Word, but the Word was really the thought. In the beginning was the thought, and the thought was with God, and the thought was God. It's all part of consciousness. And God has expressed itself as us, as individual consciousnesses. And the point to remember about that is that everything, if God is the only creator, which it is, if God is the only consciousness, if everything that God is creating is being created out of God, within God, then all there is consciousness. The substance of the creation is consciousness. The source of the creation is consciousness. The architect of the creation is consciousness. The substance of the creation is consciousness. And everything is consciousness. It's like Joel talking about having mahogany and making a mahogany chair or a mahogany table, a mahogany bench. It's all mahogany. Or a thing of cookie dough and cutting out Santa Clauses and Christmas trees and various things, but it's all cookie dough. Well, all there was to begin with and all there has ever been is God, and everything that has been expressed is God, and all there is now is God. And what's going on here right now is God talking to God for God's own purposes. There are 3 levels at which I use the word I. One, I say I, and I mean Lee. And Lee is this psychosomatic entity. Lee is this organism here. Lee is this thing which is independent from all of you and independent from God. And that's what we mean by humanhood. That's the human part of me. That's what I will call the little I. Now, Lee is really this expression of God's concept of itself. God has expressed itself as some individual expression, which currently conceives of itself as Lee, and another individual expression of itself which conceives of itself as Larry or Dulcie or Diane or what have you. God has expressed itself as this infinity of expressions. And these expressions, for some reason, aren't all aware of the fact that all they are is God and all they are is consciousness. And many of them have a level of consciousness such that their current understanding is conceived of as these separate entities. But these separate entities are just concepts. To make that clear. I guess I should say that having looked at all the work we've been doing over 5 years about the material aspects of our life, we are now jumping in at exactly the opposite end, at the very top end, and we're going to do a little bit of work for the front of this class at the very highest level so that we have some ideas in our minds, and then as we go through the workshop this afternoon and through other classes that will all have this as a reference. The problem with talking about the highest level of truth is that truth is absolutely inexpressible. If you're trying to understand this with your intellect, you're hopelessly doomed. Your intellect can't possibly understand that this is an experience. The understanding of what I'm saying is an experience that either you've had or you haven't had. And the apparent reason for gatherings like this is to increase the likelihood of your having the experience. I will tell you what my experience is. And I don't ask anybody here to believe it or accept it. I certainly wouldn't believe it 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's no matter of believing it or not. Certainly intellectually you cannot verify that it's true. There is in the center of you something, this God, this impersonal expression of God, which is consciousness, which is at the center of your consciousness. And that consciousness knows whether I'm telling the truth or not. And to the extent that you can get in touch with that consciousness, you can determine whether or not you should be here. This is the consciousness that Barbara refers to as the radar for truth. I mean, you really know when you're hearing truth or not, whether it makes any sense to you or not. I've had a couple of experiences. Once, many years ago, I was sitting in front of a guy who was supposed to be enlightened. And he was saying the most utter nonsense that I have ever heard according to my head. And yet, right here, I knew that this guy was seeing truth and that I was the one that was asleep. And so I stayed there and listened to it. And many years later, when I was sitting with Robert, I got the click and understood what he was saying. There's no possible way to express this. The truth is in the silence. All the gurus talk about the truth is in the silence, and that's why we hold silent meditations here 3 nights a week. It's because the truth is in the silence. But people want to hear words and feel like they need to hear words so that they have a sense of making progress or a sense of a goal or a sense of a target. It's all very, very much like the Zen master, if you can conceive of a bunch of mute Zen monks and a Zen master, and they're out at night and the Zen master is trying to tell them about the moon. And so he points at the moon. But he can't say, look up there. All he can do is this. And they, of course, think he's looking at his finger. And they think the message is the finger, and so they come over and they start examining his finger, and they open it and they take it apart and they do it, and they start holding their hand up like this, and it's real clear that they're obviously not getting it as hard as they do it, and the monk is trying to, the master is trying to indicate where the truth is. It's pointing to the truth, And the point is that these guys are all looking at the hand, and they all have their own ideas about what that hand means, and they all think they're right. They may think they're right or wrong, or they're not sure, but they're pretty sure that this is right and such like, and there's all this dither going on. When Buddha died, there were 19 sects of Buddhism the next day, because there were 19 disciples, all of whom thought they knew what he was saying. But the point is with all these monks, if any one of them ever glanced up there and saw the moon, they'd say, oh, shit. And they'd know beyond a doubt what the Zen master was saying, and they would know they had the truth, okay? Until you have that clarity, you don't know. When you have seen it, then you know it. Until then, we're talking about, we're pointing, and either you see it or not. And of course, it doesn't have to be as obvious as the moon. It can be, and it usually happens in little clicks. I was talking with somebody a couple of days ago, little clicks happening, and more clarity, and that's how it generally goes, And sometimes big clicks, and sometimes little clicks, but the point is to have your own experience, and everything that's going on here in this center is designed to increase the likelihood of us all having this experience, and to provide a community in which we can share about it and find the strength to do the work to increase the likelihood of our having the experience. But either you've had the experience or you haven't. The transmission is really silence. The words are nonsense. Every time I put anything I've experienced into a sentence, I've already lost 99% of it. It can't be said. So back to these 3 levels of I. There's I, this individual person who's rational and listening to human consciousness and thinks I've got to take care of myself and all this, and I think I'm separate from God and separate from you, and I'm out there taking care of myself, and I'm trying to get enlightened, and I'm going to classes, and I'm meditating as hard as I can, and I'm doing all these things. The next level of I is, words tongue-tie me, is the I that I really am, which is to say, the I that is the expression of God, okay? And that can be called the Christ, that can be called the Buddha mind, that can be called the Tao. It is the awareness, which is the truth about me. And the next level of I that I am is the I, God itself, the I that is aware of this whole thing as it is expressing itself as the middle I, the Christ, the Buddha I, which is currently thinking of itself, conceiving of itself as the I, the physical body. So these are the 3 I's, and the I, God, and the middle I, Christ, are really one I, and that it's all God. And the I, Lee, is another lie. It's just a dream. It's just a concept in consciousness. You may... What do I mean when I'm talking about in consciousness, ideas in consciousness? And the closest parallel I can give you is dreams at night. You have a dream at night. Dreams are very interesting. We're going to come back to dreams a lot because they have lots of interesting properties in them which are just very much like reality as distinct from materialism reality, because reality is a dream. It's all unconsciousness. You have a dream at night, and all of a sudden the dream starts. You're in a situation. It didn't start with your parents making love. I mean, the dream didn't start with you being born. The dream started right here, right now. You know, suddenly you're 17 or 107 or whatever it is, and you're in a situation, and there are people all around you, and there's a space all around you, and the space may be, you could have, purple skies and a blue sun and red sand, but it's real, and you know it's real, and everybody's there. There's people all around you, and you're in this dream, and maybe there's some terrible thing going on. You've got cancer, and you're going, woe is me, and you're running all over the hospital looking for somebody who can help you with the cancer, and the dream goes on for hours and hours and hours and hours, and then you wake up. And if you'd been on one of those EKG type things, the brain activity would have lasted for approximately 1 second. And you've just experienced hours of experience, and you've experienced pain and emotion and worry and angst and problems and yada, yada, yada. In a space, this huge hospital that you were running around trying to get help. And now I ask you, where is that space? What happened to that space? Where are all those people that were in the dream that you talked to, the doctors you talked to and the nurses and the people you tried to get help from? Where are all those people? What happened to them? And where is the time? What happened to that 4 hours? It happened in 1 second. It happened like that, actually. Your brain shattered for a second, but it happened like that. So there's no question that consciousness is perfectly capable of running an endless story with all the accoutrements and everything over time with absolutely no input. And everybody says, yeah, I understand that. And then Robert always talks about stuff. So you're in this dream, and let's make the dream a coffee shop now. And you're sitting in the coffee shop, and Robert says, and I walk up to you, and I sit down. And I say, it's all a dream, you know. And you say, what? Don't be silly. It's not a dream. Look. And you slap yourself. And Robert says, and I say to you, nope, it's a dream. And he said, well, look, I can pinch you. And he says, pinch me. And I say, ow. He says, see, it hurts. And I say, yeah, but it's a dream pinch and dream hurt. And, it goes on and on and on. And I'm sitting there trying to tell you it's a dream, and you're denying that it's a dream, and I'm telling you that it's a dream, you're denying that it's a dream. And then you wake up. And when you wake up, there is no question in your mind that it was a dream, right? No doubt about it. Well, what I'm telling you is that this is all a dream. And when you wake up, there will be no doubt about it that this is a dream. That's the experience we're looking for. The prerequisite is getting rid of that little lie, that the guy in the coffee shop that was claiming it's not a dream, no, it can't be a dream, I'm pinching you, etc. Had to get rid of him. While you, the dreamer, had your consciousness in that dream person, you were locked there, no way out. You had to get rid of that. Fortunately, we tend to wake up. Fortunately, those dreams are short-lived, but this dream may be short-lived too. This may be only a 1-second dream. You don't know, because that dream can go on for days and months and years and still take only 1 second in what we call real time. Time and space and matter are all part of the dream. They're all concepts within the dream. And all there is God expressing itself as God, and God going through all these experiences, and God doing whatever God is doing for its own purposes. It's God's Leelaa. And the question that I often get is, so it's a dream, so why is God doing it to me? Right? So it's just a dream. Still, why is God doing it to me? And the answer is, God isn't doing it to you. God is doing it to God. There is no you. This is God expressed as individual God, conceiving of itself as you, and forgetting that it's doing this. So that It's God that thinks it's you. It's not you that thinks it's you. It's not you that's separate from God. It's God that thinks it's you. And of course the next question is, well, why is God doing that to itself? And the only hint I can give about that is, if God is to be self-aware as distinct from just aware, the only way you can be self-aware is to know the not of something. If I have a black wall and I paint a black X on it, you don't see the X, you can't see the X. If everything's black, you can't see black. You can't have any concept of what black is. Now, how can God know what God is? How can God be self-aware unless it's aware of a not God? But we have a problem here, because there isn't anything that is not God. So this expression, it solves all of that, because God is clearly a self-aware God. It's right now, through me, God aware of you, God, and through you, God aware of me, God. And if we're getting any of this at all, we're really starting to laugh about God sitting here talking to itself for its own purposes, with no possible thing to gain. There's no possible way that you can become enlightened, since you already are. There's no possible thing to gain, since you're already God. There's nowhere to go. It's all a Leelaa. This is just my favorite word. Have to stop. Let's stop for a couple of minutes and see if we want to go anywhere else or open up. That was short, but that's enough to be said today. We have the first glimpse of the concept that this class is about. Now, the class is also going to be about supply, and the class is also going to be about healing, because these are all methods that we use to get this glimpse. Those are all hands pointing at the moon, and the class is also going to be about the nature of mind, because we all like to get our minds involved in stuff like the nature of mind. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot less Joel in this class, except for Joel's wonderful examples. There's just so much Joel material that there are great stories. And a lot more Robert, whose stories are entirely different and delightful. There's a lot more of Robert in me now than there ever was before, and so this class is going to be a Robert class. What we're going to do is have a talk like this at the start, and it's quite interruptible. There's no formality to this. This is not serious at all, of course, since it's just God playing with itself. We can't possibly take this seriously. So it's not fair taking this seriously. If you do take it seriously, it's just God taking himself seriously. And so we'll talk a little bit for as long as that takes, and then we'll open it up to a workshop. And hopefully there will be questions and discussion, and it doesn't need to relate to this topic. It can talk about anything at all. This part of the satsang Robert used to call Stump the Guru. Your reward for stumping the guru was to become enlightened. Easily delivered, since you already are. Rashneesh said that too. He used to sit there in front of 5,000 people who were all sitting at his feet, hanging on his every word. And he'd say, "This is so strange to me." He says, 5,000 of you sitting out there, and you all think I'm enlightened, and you think that's so wonderful. And he says, and I sit here looking at you and knowing that you're enlightened and thinking it's so strange that you don't tell yourself that. So realize you're enlightened. Realize it all works out perfectly. Realize it's all God playing with itself. And realize it's all unfolding exactly as it should. That's what that statement means. All is well. All is exceedingly well, Robert would say. Everything is unfolding exactly as it should. It's all just God. Probably what God is trying to do is rediscover its own enlightenment in an infinite number of different ways. So it has created an infinite number of expressions of itself, which it is taking down an infinite number of paths, all of which inevitably lead back to the realization that, oh, I'm God. What a fun game to play. What a fun game. So, we can take a bio break anytime you want to. There's a bathroom out in the hall. There's a bathroom at the end of the kitchen. And we can start questions. You can also, by the way, write questions down and bring them if you want to ask questions but don't want to cop that it's your question. You can bring questions to the class. Robert always said that, and one guy always wrote the question out and put his name on it, and if you put the name on it, the name gets read. everything on the question gets read, but I will probably know whose question it is anyway, but you've probably asked me the question before anyway. So, questions, discussion. We have another 45 minutes. Yes?
Hi, Lee.
Hi.
I don't know who Robert is or was.
Robert Adams was my guru for 7 years. And what I can tell you about Robert Adams is he was one of those rare creatures that was struck totally spontaneously enlightened at the age of 14. I mean, here is a guy who went to high school to take a math test and sat down with his blue book in front of him to write his final math test. And he had discovered many years before that whenever he wanted anything, all he had to do was say God, God, God to himself quietly, and it appeared for him. And so he had a habit of doing his test that way. He would not study or do homework or anything. He'd go in there and say God, 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 and the answers would come, and he'd write them, much like Joel's receiving the talks that he gave and such like. And this particular day, Robert went in there and he sat down and opened up the blue book and said, God, God, God. And to more or less quote him, he said this light in his chest expanded and filled him, and it filled the entire room. A light that he says is more brilliant than 1,000 suns, but yet cool. And expanded to engulf all of him and all of the room, and went out and expanded all the universe. And he said, and I dissolved into the universe. And he never came back. And what that means is that from that moment on, Robert never again ever had a sense of personal self. Robert, to him, was always third person. Robert was that body over there, that one over there. Krishnamurti talks about the speaker, sort of stuff. And Robert never again confused his reality with that body. And I spent 6 years with him 3 times a week, and often along with him for lovely periods of time. And he shared his consciousness with me. And several of us have met Robert, and several of us have been cooked by Robert. Robert referred to it as cooking us, sitting in the consciousness. An amazing phenomenon. You can't say man. He was not a man. An amazing phenomenon. Awesome gift. I called his wife this afternoon to see if I could get a big picture of him to put in here so we can look at that. Have it here. His experience, by the way, was no different from Byron Katie's. I mean, the details of it are totally different, but Byron Katie woke up one day and wasn't there. And there's a wonderful Catholic nun, Bernadette Roberts, who woke up one day and noticed this big hole where she used to be in consciousness. There was suddenly no one there.
There's a lot of avatars walking around, which means that even when they have that experience, they still become willing to remain and be here, even though everything feels like the doll. There she goes again, But when I sat down and went into meditation, I said, so, what's this class about? And I heard, light. And I wished I could have counted the number of times the word enlightenment was used, or light. And you just said it again about the light of Robert.
Sure.
And I had an experience one night when I walked in your room, and there was a picture. There's a picture of Robert Adams in the room, and when I walked in there, I was completely aware that there was absolutely no difference between Robert and Lee. I mean, it was just like the same thing. The transference had completely taken place. I was so aware of it. And many a nights I've gone in there and sat and meditated, and that's what it was just, there was no difference, you know. An amazing experience.
No, there can't be any different. There's an infinite number of material experiences and probably a small finite number of metaphysical philosophies and classes and such like, but there is one mystical experience. There may be 100 ways to teach that mystical experience, to talk about that mystical experience, but there is one and only one mystical experience. I mean, either you know you are God, either it is your experience that you are the God, or it isn't. And it's everybody. I mean, and when you have that experience, it's not that Lee or Dulcie is the God. It's that all there is the God, and all there ever was is the God. A Zen master, the typical Zen master, when he wakes up, bursts into laughter. It's the only sane thing to do when you understand what's going on is to start laughing, because you've spent all this time through a fictitious being chasing that which you already are. Diane.
Yeah, this is always so hard to do because the words, it's like I want a different language to talk to make sense, but I'll just do it in the language I know and see if it makes any sense. So, you know, Robert was probably the simply-faced 14-year-old adolescent, and he, you know, flew out and was there, and Byron Katie was, you know, a mess, drugged, alcohol. She was in a recovery home when it happened to her. So, and I don't know where Jesus was building a cabinet or working in, you know, like the rabbis. I mean, I'm not sure when this happens to everybody, but if it's going to happen sometime, why do we do this stuff? I mean, why aren't we, like Robert used to say, bowling today?
Well, if there were a we, that would be a good question.
I knew you'd do that. See?
But the fact is that God is sitting here talking to itself. And the error in that sentence is that you think there's somebody who has the option to go bowling. And the fact is God has chosen to sit in that body looking this way right now, and in this body looking that way, and we're looking into each other's eyes, and it's God looking at God, and that's what God's doing here today. And God is bowling in other disguises. All these questions assume that there's an I as separate from God.
So that would be our experience when we lose our personal sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
When I wake up one day, I was going to say tomorrow.
Good choice.
About right now.
and say, it's like, oh, there's no longer any care in here. Is that the experience? Is that the goal of us all sitting here? It's like, I need to know, because I don't know yet, that
Who needs
God
to know?
is me.
Who needs to know?
Little Karen needs to know.
If there's a little Karen, there's no such knowledge.
So
Lee and enlightenment are mutually exclusive. Lee and God are mutually exclusive. If there's a Lee, there is no God. If there's a little I, there is no God.
okay.
When there is... go ahead.
If there's death, there is no God.
If there's death, there's birth. If there's somebody birthing and dying, then that's the story. God is eternal. Outside of time, even. The story, the Leelaa, is about being born and dying, being born and making progress on this spiritual path and dying, coming back again and making progress and dying, and coming back again and making progress and dying. That's the story. That's the the Leelaa. That's the game. And none of it has any true reality. The concept that works for me, and lots of times I will just say things in a way that may or may not click with you. By the way, when I say things, it may or may not click with you, it may or may not make any sense to you, and if it doesn't, that's not a comment on me or you. That just means that that click didn't happen to you in that particular place right now. Like I tell people when they borrow books here, I usually hand them 3 books to see who's talking to them. Different people are talking to different people, and I will say things 100 different ways, all of which are lies, in the hopes that some of you it'll cause a click, and you will, because of the consciousness or whatever, glance up above rather than looking at the hand. I will show you 100 different fingers, and sometimes you'll get a click. So what was I about to click you on? I forget. Oh yeah, the story is that we come into, that we are born and have this human experience and die, and then are reborn and have this human experience and die. And this is the story. This is the Leelaa. And what I was about to say is the idea is that this expression of God, which is the continuous thing between all these birth and die, through this whole reincarnation cycle, which this psychosomatic entity apparently goes through, that the Christ, that middle eye, that eye which is the real expression of God, is born asleep, is Barbara's way of saying it, or born behind the veil is the way the Genesis says it. That God is going through the experience of not being God so that God can experience God, because you can't experience God if you don't experience not God. So that God is going through this process of discovering that it's God. That segregated, separated, but not truly expression of God, which is going through this, and it's all God playing with God, like I say. But that sense, that idea made sense for me for a while. And this is that entity, that Christ's concept of itself. In fact, my whole life is that Christ's. Is a reflection of that Christ's current level of spiritual understanding, until you get to the point where you drop it, and then then you're just watching the whole picture with this in it as well as everything else. There is a point at which you stop being this, talking about that, and start being that, talking about this, and the whole thing is just a video. The point is that if you're thinking you're not there, it's a lie, because you're thinking. Okay? If you think you've got it, you haven't. If I think I'm enlightened, I'm not. Robert used to say, we're going to hold a convention of all the gurus, and everyone who shows up is immediately disqualified. Because if there's anyone to think he's a guru, it's a lie. Because the guru is the state of there not being anyone. You can play a game which gives you a sense of enlightenment, which is something that really opened the door for me. Slowly, I never had a thought it would, but you can play the game. When you first wake up in the morning, before your first thought, and I know it's impossible to do that, it sounds like, but if you go to bed at night thinking that when you wake up in the morning you're going to look before you think, when you first come to in the morning, not with an alarm clock, but if you just wake up, there's a gap between that waking up and the first thought. And in that gap, there is no you. There is just awareness. That's the experience I'm talking about. And you say, oh, and you just lost it. I got it. Nope. You had it. Yes, Anya.
How much of the time are you in that awareness that you're not learning?
Who are we talking to? Leelaa is never in that awareness. God is always in that awareness. Yeah.
Okay, God being this and that, and the space in between this and that. The little head, is that the not God part? Is that where the relativity is, as far as God playing is concerned? Or?
Well, the whole thing is God playing. The little ed, the small I, the ed, is fine. I mean, anytime we use a personal name, that's the humanhood. That's the real you's current concept of itself. And that's what I'm saying, that's the part that's like a dream. That's the image that's just out there in consciousness, but it's just an image in mind, in God's mind or human mind, or we'll talk about minds in another class. But the real you has a current concept of itself, and that's what's being expressed here. Matter is mind expressed. That's all there is to matter. Matter is mind expressed. You discover that, you realize that every night when you dream. Every night when you dream, there's matter there in the dream, hard matter. Matter is just mind expressed. And all of your human experience is just the Christ, Eddie Christ's concept of itself. It's like at some point in our spiritual progress, it's necessary to visualize, to encounter our errors. You know, this isn't really quite right, but it's almost like there is a stage that we have to go through in which we have to manifest our current level of consciousness in order that we are confronted with and pained by those things in our consciousness which are a lie. That's why I say, by the way, that the white picket fence and the happy, comfortable life is not the goal. The goal is for you to rediscover that you're God, and the way that happens is by manifesting the content of your consciousness, including all the lies. And all the lies are painful and will cause you to address your consciousness, because you are not going to solve anything out there by fixing it out there. All the lists stay exactly as long as they were 5 years ago. You're not going to solve anything by addressing it out there. You're going to solve your problems by addressing them in your consciousness, by discovering the lie in your consciousness, which is causing this disharmony. And so, in some sense, the more problems you have, the more beneficial your life is, because you have more things to work on. You're being forced to work on growing your consciousness, on dropping your misconceptions. So all the work out there is a lie, is based on a lie. I mean, if I have a conflict with you, I clearly don't think we're both God. Because if I knew you were God, how could I have a conflict with you? All I can do is love myself as everyone. Love your neighbor as yourself means become enlightened. All you can do is realize, is love yourself in all of yourself. You know, warts and all the problems, you know. But how can you, if you realize that it's God in this Leelaa, you know, it's working perfectly. Everything's going exactly the way it should. Hitler was learning a real good lesson, and so were all the other people that were involved in that. They were all learning a lie in their consciousness about the nature of God, about the nature of reality. And if they hadn't had that lie in their consciousness, they would not have been involved in that scene. They would have been in some other scene learning about some other lie in their consciousness. You know, I mean, so even the things that are seemingly terrible are if viewed from trying to get to the white picket fence, they're terrible. But if viewed from the position of driving us to learning the lies in our consciousness so that we will eventually discover that we're God, they're gifts. They're all gifts. And viewed from the next level up, where it's God giving God a gift, it's all a bunch of nonsense. I mean, what's the point? We all take it so seriously, thinking, wow, it's not bad, it's really good for that person. But it's not good for that person. It's God playing with God.
So the little I is, that's what you mean by the little I being concept.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a concept of the middle eye, which is an expression of the big eye, is one way of looking at those levels.
And could you again give the definition of Leelaa?
Leelaa is God's play, the play of the gods, or God's play. I once heard it expressed as, if you look at all of this as a play, and God wrote the script, and God is acting all the parts, and God is the stage, and God is the scenery, and God is the audience, and God is the critics, and all that, then if you look at the universe as that, then that's Leelaa. That's looking at it as Leelaa. It's all a play. You're in a role. Pretty soon you'll drop this body and take on another one and play a different role. Yes, Bruce?
I have a question on, then prayer is a lie, and if you do pray, which eye is praying?
Prayer is not a lie. It depends a lot on what you mean by prayer.
Well, when you pray for God's will, then
that's a prayer for yourself. That's an expression of your willingness to experience God's will. I mean, that's an important step towards dropping your attachment to your personal sense of I, to the little I. Prayer from the sense of a God out there withholding things from us now, who might grant them to us if we supplicate in exactly the right manner, or hold our teeth right, or burn the appropriate amount of dead animals, or do whatever is appropriate to get his good graces. That's a lie. The idea that there is a God out there separate from yourself who is capable of giving you anything you haven't got, or withholding anything from you that you withholding anything you have got, or taking away or giving, that God doesn't exist. What you have and don't have is an expression of your consciousness. And if something is being withheld from you, it's because you don't expect it. If you think, I don't have, then that will manifest, and you will go through a life of not having. If you think, I have, then that will manifest, and you will go through a life of having. So there's no God in that sense. There certainly is a God, but it's all God, and God is playing its game, and it's not going to be influenced by itself. It wrote this play, it's working exactly the way God wants it to, and it's not going to be influenced by anything. Diane?
So to pray for somebody who oh wait a minute. So to pray for a supposed somebody who supposedly has cancer is really a waste of time.
The idea that you're praying to God and getting a God to withdraw the cancer from that person is not valid. The idea that the cancer is a manifestation, a material manifestation of consciousness, and if there are enough people who are praying, wishing well, seeing her as healthy, such like, the healthiness may occur. Because there is still a whole lot, which is not the topic of this, but there is certainly, I mean, there is, metaphysics is true in that level. It's not true in the ultimate level, it's part of the dream. But there is a power of mind, there is a power of consciousness. I mean, voodoo works, black magic works, white magic works, all those things are real in this level of consciousness, and prayer can be looked at as that. If enough people are sitting there wishing good thoughts at you, it may override your black thoughts about yourself.
It may, but it may not as well.
You can cling to it as hard as you want to. If you cling to it hard enough, you cling to it. Just like spiritual healing. If you are available to be lifted above your concept of whatever your problem is, then you will be lifted. You'll have the experience. And if you're clinging to it because you love it, or because of whatever reason, if you're clinging to it, then it probably won't work. Joel, who was an amazing healer, was still only about 80% successful. And I mean, he he did everything that Jesus did, only he did a lot more of it because he was around well, he healed from 1929 until 1964, and during the peak of his career, which was 15 or 20 years, he healed on average of 135 people a day. But he only healed 80%. Now, why not the other 20%? It wasn't his consciousness that was lacking. The lift was there. It's just the clinging to it wasn't. We'll get to healing down the pike somewhere. Right now, let's just play with Leelaa.
Is forgetting like a mind thing? In other words, you said, we do this birth-death thing. I can't remember being born.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to. I think that could be kind of interesting. I have forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Do you forget your oneness with the consciousness, or I don't know how to say it, but
Yeah.
In other words, have I forgotten?
Yeah, whatever that mechanism is, and now we're in the intellect trying to explain a spiritual mechanism, but suffice it to say that for some reason God appears to be deluding itself into thinking it's not God in all these individual cases. And, for God's own reason, by God's own mechanism, it's nothing we can think about with an intellectual mind. And why we forget the beginning of this life or previous lives or stuff like that is also part of the game. Enlightened people often remember all their previous lives. They talk about Buddha becoming enlightened and remembering his 999,999 previous lives, all of them in total exact detail. The information is there. The information apparently is not useful to us at this moment on our spiritual growth, or it would be here. And there are people in this room who have done past life work and have had experiences of previous lives and know that was true. But again, they're typically vignettes of previous lives. That work is available. You can do that. Often it's useful from a material viewpoint in order to try to improve your humanhood, because you find out why it is that some problem which has been plaguing you all your life, you discover that you brought that in with you. That's an experience, that you're deathly afraid of something in this life because it killed you 5 lifetimes ago or something. And sometimes seeing that is very freeing, because having discovered that it killed you and then having noticed that you're here takes a lot of sting out of the being killed.
In the beginning, you talked about the danger of doing all this work is about falling into a habit of improving your humanhood. And then you said this class is about forgetting about improving your humanhood. And I'm chuckling because Steve and I are house hunting, and we looked at a house we really like today with a white picket fence outside. So can you just talk a little bit more about what is improving your humanhood? How do you know when you're not doing it? How do you forget about it?
Yeah, it's of course we think about improving our humanhood, because of course we would rather be comfortable than uncomfortable. I mean, we don't seek uncomfortable situations and say, oh goody, I think I'll get really uncomfortable so I can grow a little spiritually. I mean, things are just too nice. I mean, I have no aversion to comfortable humanhood, okay? I have never sought, I live in paradise, and I have never sought that. I sold all I had and went to India and stayed there and intended to spend the rest of my life there, except my guru left there, I have never sought this. If you are seeking to improve your humanhood, i.e. manipulating your life, adjusting your life so that you can have this at the expense of other things, rather than letting it happen, and there's no rules about this, but if you're seeking to improve your humanhood, you're coming from a position of not having. And if you're coming from a position of not having, you will not have, because this is an expression of my consciousness. Now, on the other hand, if you are working on your consciousness, all this clears up. It fixes itself, because if your consciousness is harmonious, your experience must be harmonious. God is harmonious. God is eternal. God is obviously not in conflict with itself on any level. God is eternal, so it obviously can't be having little skirmishes and fights within itself, and losing the left part and gaining, And God is even beyond space and time. God is changeless. The nature of God is perfect harmony, bliss, love, joy. And to the extent that you realize that that's the nature of God, i.e. your nature, to the extent that you realize that is your nature, your life will be harmonious, bliss, joy, ecstasy. And to the extent that it's not, it's telling you there's a lie in your consciousness. You still don't believe that.
And that bliss and ecstasy and all that is according to the way you see it as well. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's going to outpicture the way... Harmony will outpicture the way you see it. Bliss is bliss. But I mean, this could be your paradise, and Dulce's could be in Barstow.
Now, if it were my paradise, harmony...
You know what I'm saying?
You're saying that and it's true. It's true that the outpicturing is through your consciousness, so that the harmonious outpicturing is harmonious for you, and it might not be for me, and my harmonious outpicturing is for me, and it might not be for you, and that's true. But when I'm talking about bliss and ecstasy, I am not talking about the outpicturing. I'm talking about the experience of infinite love, and that has no relationship to any of this, nor can you experience it, because you ain't there.
I heard something on a tape the other day, and it was about, if you're going into any kind of spiritual work with a motive, it's not enough, it's not, I mean... And yet, you can't... With the motive of, well, I don't know for anybody else, most of us are in 12-step programs. I mean, when I got sober, I got sober. There was no motive there. There was... I got sober. I didn't do it so I could get married, so I could... And that part of enlightenment or whatever spiritual experience happened with no motive.
True, but most people don't go to spiritual work without a motive. I mean, we all start with a motive. Robert didn't. I mean, this is an amazing case, but who knows what work Robert did in his previous life. I mean, he obviously did all the work in his previous life. I mean, most of us, you start spiritual work because what happens is we have a concept of God, and it fails us. I mean, if you think there's a loving God and your mother dies, God's failed you. I mean, eventually, God will fail you. Whatever picture you have of an anthropomorphic God external to yourself, it will fail you. And each one of these failures forces you to get a higher concept of God, which is to say you grow and the picture clears up. But people start spiritual work because they're uncomfortable, because they're afraid they're going to die, or they lack something, and that's why the infinite way is so strong on healing. It's a carrot. I mean, why would Joel heal anybody? Why would Jesus heal anybody? I mean, what are you healing? What's going on here? What you're doing is giving the person either a miracle, which is to say a fact that you can't explain, which forces them to restructure their intellect so that they can think a little higher and more clearly, or giving them a spiritual experience, lifting them above whatever their complaint is, so that they're in a higher situation. But it's all a carrot. I mean, he has 135 people a day that came to him wanting to get healed for material reasons. I mean, they're calling because their leg hurt, or their mother was sick, or whatever, and that's a purpose. It doesn't matter why you get here. But the point is that if you're focusing on gaining material things, it is stating that you think you are lacking, and you're causing that problem. You're causing the problem of producing the lack. If you are, Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. And what he's saying is, find God, and the rest is here. an expression of your consciousness. So the sane work to do is the spiritual work. But when you're out looking for a house, of course you're looking for a house. I mean, I woke up, I lived in a 600 square foot beach cottage down here for 10 years. This room, by the way, is 600 square feet. And I lived in that beach cottage for 10 years, and I was perfectly happy there, perfectly content there. And I woke up one morning, and it said, I have to get a bigger place. I need a bigger place. And I'm delighted with this little place. A block from the beach, I bought it for $18,000. It's a miracle that I'm there, And I've been there 10 years, and I'm delighted with it. But like I suddenly know I need a bigger. And I think, why is that? And then I realize my granddaughter is old enough now that she can start coming to stay with me. And I should have a room for her. Okay? This is the nonsense that my mind is coming up to justify the fact that I need a bigger house, So I drive out of the driveway, start up the hill, and there's a for sale sign on this house that wasn't there the day before. My house was right there. I drove past it every day. There's a for sale sign on the house that day. So I call Don Servio, and he says, oh, is that place for sale? I'll get back to you. He says, I can get you in there on Wednesday. You can see it Wednesday. It's the real estate agent's open house. So I showed up on Wednesday and walked in the front door. And this is it. I haven't even looked around. So I walked through the house because, it's like a due diligence thing. I went through the house because you're supposed to look at the whole house, And I walked out the back door, and sitting on the sidewalk out in the backyard is my cat, who hasn't been at my house in 6 weeks. I have no idea where this cat is. This is old Rorschach, and he's an alley cat. Not the cat that's here now. This is old Rorschach. He's a black and white alley cat, tomcat that runs for 6 and 8 weeks, And he's sitting in the backyard. And I look at him, and I said, you didn't need to come by. I know. and he ran off. I didn't see him again for 4 weeks, I mean, it was my place. And so I made an offer, and we were in escrow Friday. But, it was not that I was seeking the house, and I had no idea that this was going to be here. This is obviously, you see why we had to have the house. This is our house, and it was to do this work. But it certainly looked like improving my humanhood, didn't it? When I got up here on the hill and looked out at that view, from my house, you can almost see between that much water somewhere, and here I saw this, from upstairs, it's coast to coast, uninterrupted, and I'm thinking, my gosh, But that's an expression of the work that I did the previous 15 years. It never was the purpose. When I went to India, it was not to have this house. It was because I couldn't not be with Rajneesh. And when I hung out with Robert, it was because I couldn't not. Yeah. So I'm telling Joanne about a month ago that we're going to have a class, and I sort of have a clue about what the class is. And she often sits next to me at the morning meeting with a Joel book and sits there highlighting stuff so that she'll be sure I'll see it, so that, she's taking care of my teaching. And she highlights all this good stuff so that I'll see it. And she walks in there the very next morning after I knew the class was supposed to happen, and she walks in and she sits down right next to me and opens her book, this book, which is a wonderful book, by the way. I highly recommend.
What's it called?
Joel Goldsmith, Beyond Words and Thoughts. That's the text for this stuff. She comes in, and here's this paragraph right there in front of me. The goal of the mystical life is to be a beholder of God in action, a life in which nothing is ascribed to oneself, not even good motives. As for desire, there is none. There are not even needs, because every need seems to be met before one becomes aware of it as a need. This is living by grace, but you can live fully by grace only as that selfhood, that which has a desire, a hope, or an ambition, disappears. And that's what we're talking about. That's when that self disappears, then you can see the Leelaa for what it is. Now, right now, we're all aware, right? Everybody's aware. We agree? That's the awareness I'm talking about. There's not two awarenesses. That's the awareness I'm talking about. The only difference is this endless chatter that's going on, preventing us from being aware of the awareness. And when that chatter is silent, here it is. Here it is. When I say here it is, that's here God is. Here it is. That's all there is. The silence is always here. And that was what Rajneesh told me the first time I met him. He said, anytime you can sit in silence for 5 minutes, it will be done. Of course, that took... It was in 1981 he told me that. It took a while. But the silence is all it is. Just the silent awareness, watching the Leelaa. And you don't do the Leelaa, you watch the Leelaa. What else?
Where does fear come in?
Fear is humanhood. Fear is the belief that there's you separate from God, that has to take care of himself. That, fear is the human consciousness that, if I don't take care of myself, nobody will. I better get mine before you get yours. If I don't have it, I won't get it. Or if I do have it, you'll take it away from me, or I'll get hurt, or all this. Fear is impossible if you have no I sense. If there's no I, there's no one to be afraid. Fear is impossible. Fear is just all of human motivation. Little I motivation is fear. All of God motivation is love. And it's really that simple. If you want to know who's running the show, check the motive. And if there's fear in it, it's you. And if there's no fear, if it's love, it's God. Or if there's fear and it's not you, as the case may be. In other words, it's little I. All of human interaction, all of human action, all of human everything is based in fear. If you go deep enough, you will discover that we do everything based on fear until we get into the higher consciousness. And as our consciousness goes up, more and more things are done by love. And when you are clear, then everything is based in love. And when you're really clear, it's all love and there's nothing happening.
Wouldn't God have to create fear also, or is that just a concept of the second eye?
It's part of the second eye, the middle eye's belief that it's separate from God. In that sense, God created fear. If you think you're alone, all of that fear comes up. If you think you're separate, then you got problems. If you know you're not, if you know you're God, and fear is atheism. Right? Fear is there is not a God. My life is not full of grace. There is not a God that's taking care of me. Fear is just atheism. And God is not atheistic, so it has to be the humanhood that's fear. Fear is atheism, but God is not theism. God is not a theology. God is not a belief. God is an experience. Or it's a theory, which is fine to work with. But God is an experience. The only experience.
I'm awake, and I'm seeing what's going on, and I'm aware that I'm in the room. If my body is gone, where's that awakeness? Is it still here?
Why do you think that the awakeness has anything to do with your body?
So I don't need the body to be aware?
Clearly. Are you aware of your body?
I can see it if I look at it.
Your body is within your awareness. Your body is within your consciousness. We have this funny idea that our consciousness is encapsulated in our brain, right? Now let's think about that just for a minute. This will be the last thing because we are going to close at 5:30. We have this idea that our consciousness is encapsulated in our brain. Now we know through medical science that our brain is a bunch of grooves and neurons firing in there, right? There's little neurons firing and little electrical impulses running around and all this stuff, and that's all that's in the brain. Now we claim that we see light come in, but light strikes the eye, and there's little pots at the back of the retina, and what all that means is that eventually that turns it into neurons, right? Little electrical impulses that fire around a neuron. So there's nothing going on in your brain but electrical charges. Just click, 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 click. Now I ask you, where does orange come from? If your brain is only seeing electrical impulses, where does orange come from? I mean, but you have a concept. Look at those roses. Where do you get roses? Where do you get the? I mean, all that's going on in your brain is electrical impulses. There's nothing else in there. You know, where did all these concepts come from? Where is oranges and roses and dulces and things like that, you know? I'm so glad that dulce means sweet. Where does all that stuff come from, you know? I mean, you have no idea when we say orange, you know, is your orange the same as my orange? How would you find out, you know? I mean, there's no way. Where did the image come from? And yet when you sleep at night, you create all these images with no sensory input at all when you dream. You create these whole worlds that may or may not bear any relationship to reality out of nothing with no sensory input at all. Okay? So I claim that this awareness, oranges and roses and God and people and all of you, you know, that's not in my brain. My brain is in my consciousness. My brain is in my awareness. It's all within, you know, the whole universe is within my awareness. I can see Saturn. How big is my awareness? I can see Alpha Centauri. How big is my awareness? I mean, my awareness, little I's awareness engulfs the entire universe. How can that awareness not be God awareness? I mean, if it's not God's awareness, we're certainly direct overlays of each other, because I can include in my awareness everything that's in my awareness, which is what's in God's awareness. So the awareness, the consciousness, is God. Now the confusion is our concepts about that and our thinking. All this stuff is attached to the little I. I think, I see, I fear, I worry, I need, I'm going to get, I desire, I lose, I gain, I. As Robert would say, I. And the fact is that if you work on that exercise, if you want to, of trying to catch that gap in the morning, because it won't be long if you work on it before you'll have a second or two gap. And of course, immediately you'll jump in, but you'll see it. And that's what I'm talking. And right now, I used to go to the talks that Rashneesh gave in Hindi, because I didn't understand the word of Hindi, which of course immediately got my intellect out of the way. So I'm sitting in the presence, and I'm in the consciousness, and Hindi sounds like a song, but the rhythm is very different from English. And so he would come to the end of a sentence and stop, and my English-conditioned ear wouldn't stop. And I'd fall off the end of his sentence into the silence, because I'm listening, and I didn't hear the end of the sentence coming, and start, you know, and so I kept falling off the end of his sentences into the silence. And so the Hindi talks were much more significant to me than the English talks. It was very interesting. That silence. Okay, let's be quiet for 1 minute.